I'm Annabel Heseltine. I'm the editor of Schoolhouse magazine, and I am a July baby. And I went up and down twice. And I went from being top of the class to scraping along somewhere not even halfway. And I remember the confusion. I was only about 7 or 8. I also have 2 babies, twins, who were born in August. Their due date was September the 10th. They're both dyslexic, and they have really struggled. And I fought like crazy, even at nursery school, and we all know how difficult it is to get into nursery school stage, let alone any other stage in London. And I remember ringing the headmistress and saying, I'm really sorry. I cannot send them to you. They're having naps in the afternoon. They are just not ready. And she said, Annabel, I virtually never hear that from parents. Absolutely, I will delay their entrance until January. And I heaved a huge sigh of relief because I thought I was going to lose the place. I know there are lots of parents out there who still believe that their children should stay, and I think that one of the things will come out is that there's an issue of individuality and of freedom. The Institute of Physical Studies says that there is a child born in the summer months is 20% less likely to go to university. And there is a book written by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, which looks at the issue. If you are very young, if you are immature, you have the sense that you are not as good. And the teachers within a system, and I'm sure Sarah will want to say something about this later on, the teachers within the system will have this impression, which is understandable, that that child is not so good. This is going to get reflected back. And statistically, this carries on throughout the school career. And I have come across a lot of parents who don't want to listen to this. Now, Sarah, what is your take on it?
Well, I first noticed it was a real problem when I was head of our pre-prep school, starting with 64-year-olds joining the school each year and seeing the gap and the gulf between what the September-born children were able to do and the maturity and the developmental stage of those born in those summer months. And the absolute sort of finite decision that 1st of September would be the marker of when you came to school began to seem ridiculous and putting a lot of children at an unnecessary disadvantage. So we've talked about the research, and what's interesting to me about the research about summer-born children is how many different areas there seem to be impacts on those youngest children. There's research about, which Annabel's already mentioned, about the numbers of people going on to some of the best universities. There's also research that says that the oldest children in our year group are much more likely to be successful in the world of sport. Over 40% of our top footballers are born in those autumn months. And of course, when they first start school, their physical development is going to be far ahead of their summer-born peers.
And what about with learning difficulties? I mean, there's some statistics that suggest that more children born in the summer months are diagnosed with learning difficulties, which doesn't make any sense at all. So clearly there is some misunderstanding, which I think...
Absolutely, and I think if you look back at the nursery schools, where I think it's even called developmental matters, most of the things that children need to do in their first year at school are not to do with academic ability. They're to do with their listening skills, their early language skills, their fine motor skills, their concentration skills. These are developmental, and in the same way as you wouldn't expect a baby to be able to crawl 6 months earlier than another baby, it's the same with all of those sides. And I think some teachers, perhaps less experienced teachers, may mistake that developmental stage with an ability. And certainly there's a lot of research that says that summer-born children, I think I've got the stat in front of me, are 90%, August-borns are 90% more likely to be identified with special educational needs than children born in September.
Is there more worry about boys opposed to girls?
I think given that there's a slightly higher prevalence of special educational needs identified within boys anyway, no doubt that will be potentially increased with this August issue. And I think if you look at the developmental differences between boys and girls, you'll see that actually the areas in which boys are further ahead than their female friends, if you like, at that age, are skills that aren't always necessarily celebrated within the classroom environment. In other words, it's to do with their gross motor skills over their fine motor skills. And we need to be very careful, be it through the age of the children or the gender of the children. These first 2 years at school, to me, are the most crucial 2 years, because this is where a child develops the sense of themselves as a learner. I'm someone that's good at maths, I'm someone that's good at reading, I find it easy to make friends. All of these thoughts that they're having very much linked to their self-esteem, which we know is so important throughout their lives. some of these will be established in these first 2 years at school, and I think the summer-born difference, the gender difference, all needs to be taken into account by the schools to make sure that each child is being given the opportunities they need to excel.
And is there anything that the parents can do to support a child in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the advice would be typical parenting advice, really. I think given the potential impact on children's self-esteem by being the youngest in the year group, perhaps less likely to be picked for teams, perhaps someone that's going to initially struggle to do some of the writing, some of the written activities, it's really important that they feel boosted. And I think, therefore, choosing a school where the pastoral care is very strong, where the attention to detail is spot on is important. But as a parent, anything you can do to support your child, to find them hobbies and interests that help boost their self-esteem outside of school is very important. Within school, talking to the nurseries before they start school about what you can do to help them be school ready. That doesn't mean pushing them to write their name before they're ready. It means giving them the confidence to ask to go to the loo rather than sit there and wonder what to do in that situation. It means helping them to read their names so that they can identify their peg or their desk or their chair. It's little things like that, but talking to the nurseries about school readiness, I think, is important for everyone, but especially so for those summer-born children.
Your daughter, I believe, is a summer baby. Is that correct?
She's the end of May.
She's the end of May. So according to the government's categorisation, don't you think April's a little bit early to be?
I do. I mean, I think rather than the government not introducing flexibility, having a look at where the definition of summer-born, I think there's a good case that says maybe April, May, even mid-June, but the evidence you were showing earlier is absolutely clear in terms of July, August, and then August the 31st against September the 1st the year before. And I think the impressive statistic about sports and other things. So, but I think that you could tighten up the definition, but I think the key thing at the moment is the government does need to give the lead on flexibility and changing the law, and changing the code of admissions con. And they're not appearing to want to do that. But I think the key point here, and the key point that I've tried to stress, and I think Sarah was stressing as well, is it's about the individual child. It's giving the opportunity for the individual child. It's not saying that I'm not saying that everybody who was born in August will necessarily need that. It depends on their motor skills, their emotional development. I mean, personally, I went through the school system a year early. I passed the exam a year early, went through the whole...
So you were very young.
Sometimes, it can happen the other way around as well, because people are a lot bigger than you and that sort of thing. So I saw it. But I think it's all about the individual child. I don't think it's about labelling them. I think it's about giving people the opportunity. It's
all about the individual, and that's a very hard thing, though, to build into a legal system, isn't it? Because it doesn't rely upon the bureaucracy and the interpretation. So that requires education.
It is a real challenge, and then some people will say, well, some parents will try and game the system for their child. Some parents might. Some of the issues about is it going to cost the state more because they have people in the education system more. It's not the same probably in independent sector. But I don't think that should be our preeminent problem. The problem should be looking at what is best to allow these children the best opportunity for their lives, because they'll be in the education system for maybe 20 years, but there'll be 40 years or 50 years or 70 years of life thereafter.
And you want to set them up feeling confident.
And it's, like the lady said there, just because you're born on one date and you don't quite fit that year, doesn't mean to say you're slow, or it just means that potentially you need the opportunity to achieve your educational potential in a different way and over a different period.
Now, I can understand your frustration of having somebody ready to go. But it comes back down to the individuality. What do you
Well,
think,
I guess it's the whole issue about having a September the 1st date in a system, and it can't ever cope for anybody. I suppose I have been looking at it from the other way around, but from your point of view, some flexibility the other way. Now, it may well be that I don't know. Sarah would say whether the independent sector copes for that as well. But the state sector, I think, finds a real problem with it. But I don't know.
I've spoken to a number of parents over the years that feel that their child is ready. Again, September-born children. Sometimes it's about making sure you can find a nursery where they will very much follow the strengths of that particular child. There's absolutely no reason why a capable, bright child can't learn to read and write whilst they're at nursery school, and many nursery schools would certainly encourage that and provide those opportunities for them. Again, I do think it's about not having this fixed date and about parental choice. It would be very, to me, the perfect situation would be to think of the years between 4 and 6 as a sort of a 2-year bracket, and children starting school at the point where their parents think that they're ready for that next step in their education. And then by the time the children have got to the age of 6, we're all in a similar place, ready to move on into their more sort of formal side of their academic education.
So this really raises the question of the problem of moving the children on into the senior schools. And if you do sometimes take the children out of their academic year, how do you deal with that?
On a case-by-case basis or child-by-child basis with the senior schools. So just referring to some twins I had before, they were born at 26 weeks. They were incredibly premature, and they started with us late. We said they could start with us in the January rather than in the September into reception, and by the end of that reception year we felt that whilst one of the twins was very much ready for year 1, the other one wasn't, and there was various question marks over whether perhaps this child had some additional learning needs, or was she indeed just born prematurely and not in the right year group. So one of the children went up to year 1 and one redid that kindergarten year. They are both now at the same senior school but continuing to be in different year groups. Some schools are very flexible, others are very adamant that the rules are to be upheld. In my experience, the girls' schools are a bit more flexible than the boys'. The boys' schools often quote the rules about football and rugby and cricket, and they can't play in teams that are out of year group. The girls' schools seem to be a little more flexible with that. My advice for anyone with a child that still hasn't quite reached their potential or is showing what they can really do is to do the entry exams for a school at a later date. In other words, I would suggest that you look at doing an 11+ entry to a school rather than trying to make the move at 7+. I think that the differential between the age and the impact it can have on the children lessens with age. So the later you can leave it to take those assessments into the senior schools, the better would be my advice. So if there's the option for her not to do 7+ and to remain at her current school till 11 or till 13 or whatever, I would probably take that. I think rushing children at anything tends to backfire. And I think as parents, and I say this as one with 2 school-age children myself, there's always a temptation to spend a lot of time focusing on what comes next rather than what's happening right now. And so I would just try, if you desperately want to prepare her for a 7+ and you're doing it right now, I would do it, in the month beforehand, not in the 6 months beforehand. In other words, keep it as close to the moment when she's going to do it. But if you can do it later, I would do it later.